Next on Secrets of War. Untold stories behind the boldest United States military strike since Vietnam. The surprise invasion of Panama. The secret build-up to the attack. The classified mission by special forces to rescue an American hostage. And the manhunt for a dictator who pushed his luck too far. The invasion of Panama is next on Secrets of War.
Estados Unidos no tienen nada en contra de ustedes, campeones, en un plan personal.
December 1989. American forces invaded the country of Panama. Operation Just Cause was a quick and overwhelming victory for the United States military. The fighting was brief, and the mission concluded in a matter of weeks. However, the swiftness of the invasion also obscured the secrets behind it, such as the bold exploits of America's shadow warriors and the surreal nature of the combat. For U.S. and Panamanian soldiers, the enemy was the neighbor next door. Operation Just Cause has often been described as a just manhunt for General Manuel Antonio Noriega, a man who defied the only superpower in his hemisphere. But the invasion meant more to the Panamanians and Americans whose lives were affected. It was a tragic chapter between two countries and two peoples who share an intimate history. Panama's destiny was determined by geography. As the shortest land bridge between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, it was a crossroads of commerce for centuries. In 1903, the United States wanted to build a canal for its navy. It helped Panama declare its independence from Colombia. That year, the United States and Panama signed a treaty together. Panama became a nation, but granted the Americans a corridor of land bisecting the country and the right to build a canal through it. Through two world wars and into the 1980s, the United States and Panama developed a semi-colonial relationship. America used Panama for access to the canal and as a strategically important location for thousands of U.S. troops. In turn, Panama became closely tied to the U.S. economically, politically, and even psychologically.
Panama and the United States, first of all, are very close. They're very close in terms of culture, in terms of people, intermarriage, tremendous amount of intermarriage between Panamanians and Americans. But one has to wonder over time whether there's a separate Panama that exists, or if in fact Panama is a kind of a 51st state of the United States.
The wealth flowing into the canal zone didn't improve the economic status of many Panamanians living around it. The affluent lifestyle of the Zonians, or U.S. citizens living in the canal zone, led to anti-American resentment by some in the country. There were several bloody uprisings, including a student riot in 1964 in which over 20 Panamanians were killed. In 1977, the United States agreed to give up the Panama Canal by the year 2000. President Jimmy Carter and General Omar Torrijos signed a treaty that eliminated the Panama Canal Zone. The treaty began the gradual process of relinquishing the canal and several military installations to Panamanian control. In a few years, Carter would be out of office and Torrijos would be killed in a suspicious plane crash. Their vision of a peaceful transition was not to be. In 1983, General Manuel Antonio Noriega became leader of the Panamanian Defense Force, or PDF, and essentially the ruler of Panama. A master at intelligence gathering, Noriega collected information on friends and enemies, then sold it for a price. Business was very good. Noriega's personal wealth was reported to be immense. Despite persistent reports of drug trafficking, corruption, and brutality, several agencies of the U.S. government found Noriega useful. The Central Intelligence Agency had worked with him since the 1960s. When George Bush was director of the CIA, he met with Noriega in 1976. When he was vice president, he met Noriega again in 1983.
Noriega saw the United States government with the eye of a fly. He was able to break down the U.S. government into many parts, see them all at the same time and see how they acted together. And he paid particular attention to the parts of the government that most affected Panama and most affected his fortune.
As the Reagan administration worried about communism in Latin America, Noriega established a relationship with Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. North was the point man in what was a clandestine operation to support anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua.
In 1985, Oliver North came to Panama a number of times to ask Noriega for help. Could Contra leaders meet in Panama? Sure, said Noriega. Could they train there? Sure, said Noriega. North appeared to venerate Noriega as a real tough hombre who was able to really do things without laws.
In 1987, Noriega's political fortune began to change. That year, one of Noriega's top aides accused him of fixing elections and being involved with the murder of a political opponent. In February of 1988, 2 federal grand juries in Florida indicted Noriega on drug trafficking charges. The Reagan administration called for him to resign and imposed harsh economic sanctions on Panama. Now facing economic hardship, Panamanian citizens began to protest. After years of military dictatorship and corruption, they wanted a democratic government. The perception of Noriega in Washington began to change from intelligence asset to political embarrassment. Removing him became a U.S. national security interest, but exactly how was unclear.
In the past, we've put up with corrupt Panamanian dictators as long as they served our interests. And our interest in Panama, of course, is the canal. Noriega got to be too much. He got to be too corrupt. He got to be too brutal.
As the rhetoric grew between the United States and Noriega, armed confrontation seemed inevitable. Ironically, American troops now faced an army that in many ways was created by their government. Panama had only a police force until the 1950s, when the U.S. began spending millions of dollars turning it into a military force to help defend the canal. By the late 80s, the Panamanian Defense Force numbered around 18,000 troops. A majority of the PDF were police and administration personnel. Only about 3,500 were trained infantry. These included the Macho de Monte, or mountain men, and special forces units. There was also the Battalion 2000, Its name was a reference to the year 2000 and the ironic fact that the United States had been training these soldiers to take over the defense of the canal in that year. American military planners in Panama had envisioned many threats, but never a hostile Panamanian military. After the indictment of Noriega in February 1988, they began to plan for a possible confrontation with the PDF. The U.S. had almost 10,000 troops deployed in Panama as part of U.S. Southern Command, or SOUTHCOM. General Fred Warner was the commander. His staff developed a top-secret plan called Elaborate Maze. It called for a gradual, phased buildup of U.S. forces. The plan had 5 phases. The offensive or attack phase was later codenamed Blue Spoon. Warner believed the U.S. did not have to attack Panama to remove Noriega. If he was ordered to do so, he would follow the plan and mass his forces. However, he had his own secret strategy in mind to avoid fighting and bloodshed. With his troops in position, he would personally call senior PDF officers on the phone and tell them to overthrow Noriega or else.
If you solve the problem internally, we won't have to fight, and this will go down as a training exercise. He figured he wouldn't have to make more than 2 or 3 phone calls, and it would get solved. And if it didn't, he had the force to do it and simply overwhelm the PDF. That psychological operation, if you will, was never published as part of any plan. That was in General Warner's head. When he told it to me, I reacted with a, good Lord, that really would have worked.
To add to Noriega's forces, dignity battalions were created, made up of volunteers. Benjamin Colamarco, one of the leaders, insisted they were patriots.
Our goal in the battalions was essentially to act as a backup, as a second line of defense for the armed forces of the Republic of Panama to repel an attack by the U.S. Army. So it was a group made up of different classes, especially from the urban areas who had a wide sense of nationalism.
In May of 1989, Panama held democratic elections. Noriega's candidate was defeated in a landslide by a coalition party led by President Guillermo Endara. One of his vice presidents was Billy Ford.
The dictator at the time decided to annul the election that same evening. Then on Wednesday, the 10th of May, we decided to go out and fight for our success, our triumph. All of a sudden, all hell broke loose when the dignity battalions were hoodlums, members of the paramilitary. They sort of broke the lines protected by the armed forces, and they started hitting everybody and their friend that was very near the plaza.
Vice President Billy Ford and the other opposition leaders barely escaped with their lives.
Eventually, one of the guys on the right-hand side tore down the window, took a Garfield, hit me on the shoulder and pulled out 2 tendons. That's the blood that you can see on the shirt. It was just a madhouse.
As the PDF and dignity battalions waged war against Panamanian citizens, U.S. officials worried that the thousands of American citizens in Panama might become a target of Noriega's army. The signing of the Carter-Torrijos Treaty in 1979 set the stage for the Panama crisis because this document governed relations between the 2 countries. The treaty opened several U.S. military bases to the Panamanian military. At these bases, Panamanian and U.S. guards stood side by side. At installations like Fort Amador, U.S. families lived in houses just 100 yards away from PDF barracks and one of General Noriega's headquarters. Only a golf course separated them. Even though the Carter-Torrijos Treaty bound Panamanian and U.S. soldiers together in many ways, there was increasing hostility between them.
When they dig a fighting position that is within about 200 yards of my house, and my wife lives in that house, and on a particular day they have pointed that 50 cal at my house or another family member's house, we took that very seriously.
The Reagan administration was divided on how to solve the Noriega problem, and 1988 was an election year. Vice President George Bush was running for president. Southern Command received the word from Washington to avoid headlines, so Bush's past dealings with Noriega would not be scrutinized. With a lack of a clear policy, the hands of U.S. forces in Panama were tied. The PDF began to harass and intimidate American soldiers and civilians. From 1987 to 1989, Americans reported thousands of incidents, including arrests, beatings, even rape. After the election violence in May of 1989, George Bush, now President Bush, gave the green light to Southcom, not to invade, but to engage Noriega and the PDF with a show of force. Southern Command began conducting military exercises called sand fleas. These maneuvers, often conducted on U.S. installations, were part training and part psychological warfare. The exercises gave U.S. troops a chance to practice elements of their secret invasion plans. They were also designed to show that American forces would move freely, usually in armored personnel carriers, to defend U.S. interests. Despite American claims that these maneuvers were legal and within their treaty rights, some Panamanians considered them acts of provocation. Sometimes these U.S. convoys would encounter Dignity Battalion members.
They violated the dignity of our country as an independent nation. This is a very shameful act. We took great care not to give in to those acts of provocation and displayed our nationalism better yet. On many occasions, members of the Dignity Battalions had to face the U.S. Army war tanks with Panamanian flags alone, without any weapons, raising only the Panamanian flag, demanding that our sovereignty be respected.
Panamanian television, controlled by Noriega, responded to U.S. military force with propaganda broadcasts.
With only flags and their fists, the outraged and heroic people of Chorrera protested the arrival of American troops.
Dignity battalions and U.S. troops also confronted each other at U.S. facilities.
They would bring some little old lady and start chewing out the American soldiers, in Spanish. And most American soldiers didn't speak Spanish, so they would try to argue with the lady, and I'd tell them, listen, do you guys watch, after an operation, I'd say, did you watch the Panamanian news? No. He says, you ought to watch the Panamanian news. See how you're coming out.
Major General Cisneros countered Noriega's propaganda by meeting with the Spanish-speaking press. As an Hispanic from Texas, he presented a different viewpoint.
I'm confronting the Panamanians, calling them everything that they really are, thugs and so forth, and man, they wanted to kill me. They saw me as a Hispanic traitor.
I think that Mark Cisneros will go down in history as a Chicano who betrayed the Hispanic race, and he was instrumental in invading a country of his brothers, of his own Latin American blood.
It was a surreal game of brinksmanship as U.S. and Panamanian troops confronted each other. The rule book was the Carter-Torrijos Treaty. One of the conditions of the treaty was that the U.S. had to inform the PDF before they conducted every exercise. Southcom used this rule to its advantage.
We were jerking them, and that's what we wanted to do. We would wake them up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and they would go on alert, and they would go on alert, and we were just doing it over and over and over again. It got to the point that when we would do them, they would not go on alert anymore.
These sand flea exercises were a major secret of success for Operation Just Cause. The Panamanians were desensitized to U.S. troop movements, allowing the Americans to achieve a greater degree of tactical surprise during the invasion. In October of 1989, Southcom received a report that someone in the PDF would try to overthrow Noriega. U.S. troops deployed to various positions with orders to observe. One of the general's trusted officers succeeded in arresting Noriega and held him prisoner in the Comandancia, a compound of military buildings in the heart of Panama City. However, General Maxwell Thurman, the new Southcom commander, and his superiors in Washington didn't believe this was an actual coup. They thought it was another Noriega trick to embarrass the Americans. U.S. troops blocked some streets, but not others. They were ordered not to intervene as troops loyal to Noriega moved in to rescue their leader. At this time, Major General Cisneros was still in contact with Noriega's captors.
So I told him, listen, you don't have control of the situation. I asked him to turn Noriega over to me. They said, we will not give you Noriega. We're going to let him retire in dignity. I said, you're a fool. Noriega's not going to let you. I mean, that is absolutely stupid. And he said, by the way, they're already near you.
Get back, get back.
Noriega's loyal troops freed him. Many who were involved with the coup were later tortured and put to death. For General Noriega, it was a victory. For the United States, an embarrassing black eye. The Bush administration had missed a golden opportunity to topple the dictator. War planning now began in earnest. Lieutenant General Carl Steiner was put in charge of the invasion. Steiner and his staff thought that Blue Spoon would give Noriega too much time to take hostages, prepare a defense, and cause casualties. The new plan, renamed Operation Plan 90-1 and later 90-2, was a blitzkrieg assault that would remove Noriega and destroy the PDF. 26,000 soldiers would be involved. Paratroopers from the United States and troops already deployed in Panama would take down 27 key targets throughout the country. This would happen all at once, all during H hour, the hour of invasion. Suddenly, on the 16th of December, 1989, war was just around the corner for Panama and the United States. An American officer was shot and killed at a PDF roadblock. Another American officer was beaten after he and his wife witnessed the shooting. The next day, the order came to execute the invasion. The plan was now renamed Operation Just Cause. D-Day was set for December 20th. H hour would be 1 o'clock in the morning. Close to 10,000 paratroopers would arrive on the first night. It would be the largest wartime airborne assault since World War II. In Panama, U.S. troops moved into position. Many soldiers weren't told that this was an actual assault until the last possible minute. Others who knew that this was the real thing faced an awful choice. Either obey orders and keep the invasion secret, or disobey orders and warn loved ones that they might be in danger. On the night of December 19th, Noriega was relaxing at a recreation center next to Torrijos Tocumen International Airport. He appeared to be unconcerned about reports of an impending invasion.
Noriega felt very secure that it wouldn't happen. He had high-level contact with the CIA, high-level contact with the DEA, and these agencies, I think, in the end, trick him into believing that there would be no invasion.
Noriega did receive a phone call earlier that day.
The call was from one of his most trusted American friends in Washington, who told him, don't worry. This phone call might have been, and it's one of the big secrets of war, who made it, might have been the last betrayal.
Around midnight, Noriega's bodyguards brought one of his mistresses to him. About an hour later, paratroopers began jumping out of planes above him. Not only had Noriega miscalculated U.S. intentions, he had unwittingly placed himself right next to the international airport, one of the major targets in the opening hour of the invasion. The 20th of December, 1989, an AC-130 Spectre gunship quietly cruised above Panama City. At the hour of invasion, most of Panama was asleep, completely unaware of the gathering American storm, Operation Just Cause. A major target for U.S. forces was Noriega's main headquarters in the Comandancia. At H hour, the Spectre gunship pounded the Comandancia, blasting it with its cannons and 105mm howitzer. The thunder and fury of war jolted civilians out of their sleep. Some had a front row seat. Many turned their TV sets on to find out what was going on.
Special announcement. There is fighting throughout Panama, and all personnel should remain at home, remain in place.
Also at H hour, U.S. troops moved into Fort Amador. Southcom had intelligence reports that the PDF would attack U.S. housing there in retaliation for any invasion. After securing the housing areas, U.S. troops blocked the front and rear gates to contain the PDF. Several PDF soldiers tried to escape by driving their vehicles at high speed around the U.S. roadblocks, firing their weapons.
So we had to get the chaplain to one of the Panamanian soldiers that was losing a lot of blood. Another one that kind of sticks in my mind, he had been shot 2 or 3 times, and part of his leg had been blown off. Watching a soldier die in front of you, watching the color leave his body, you become much more sensitive to really what kind of your weapons are capable of.
As U.S. soldiers seized Fort Amador, others had the unenviable task of clearing the Comandancia. As U.S. troops moved in, snipers fired at them from the surrounding high-rises. Over megaphones, psychological operation troops asked the PDF to surrender.
Oficiales, soldados y civiles en la comandancia están completamente rodeados por las Fuerzas Armadas de los Estados Unidos.
Some Panamanian soldiers listened. Others stayed and fought back. The fighting in the Comandancia was among the fiercest in the war. Throughout the night and into the morning, U.S. forces took down every one of the 27 key designated targets. Among the most important were Panama's major airports, including Torrijos Tocumen International Airport and Rio Hato. Army Rangers parachuted in and overpowered any PDF resistance. The worst of the war was over in a few hours. During the war, there was a small airfield just outside Panama City, near the high-rise district. Its name was Paitilla. The elite U.S. Navy SEALs know the name well. These shadow warriors are still haunted by the memory of what happened here during the first hours of Operation Just Cause. General Noriega kept his Learjet at this airfield. The Southcom staff worried that he might use it to escape in the opening moments of the invasion. The mission for the SEALs was not only to destroy the jet, but also to take over the airfield.
It was the type of attack that Army Rangers, a large company of Army Rangers, should carry out. The tactics went counter to what the SEALs traditionally do.
Another problem was that 48 SEALs were involved in the mission.
SEALs normally plan their tactics or their assaults in very, very small numbers. In some cases, no more than 4 or 5, at the most 6.
During the invasion, the SEALs lost the element of surprise. A Panamanian guard saw them as they approached in the water. He ran back to the hangar to wake up the other guards. The SEALs were only expecting 3 or 4 lightly armed men. Their opponents turned out to be at least twice that many and well armed.
7 to 11 individuals, only 4 in the Panamanian military. The rest were Noriega hired bodyguards, most likely from the drug trade. These were pretty bad hombres there.
The Panamanians had 20 minutes to set up for an ambush as the SEALs headed their way.
They spread themselves out throughout that particular hangar and the adjacent hangars, up on the 2nd floor, ground level, high on the roof, and they just waited.
And in the final minutes, a group of SEALs stood up in front of the hangar, completely exposing themselves to fire.
It was such a basic, day one mistake as far as tactics is concerned, that it baffles all the SEALs that hear about it. The Panamanian officer walked out in front of Noriega's hangar and said, "What are you Americans doing here?" And the Americans said to him in English, a little bit of broken Spanish, "Put your weapons down." And the Panamanian officer replied, "You should not be running exercises here. This is very dangerous." And shortly thereafter, fire broke out.
After a minute and a half of gunfire, 4 SEALs lay dead in the Paitilla tarmac and 8 were wounded. The remaining SEALs opened up with everything they had, completely destroying the hangar and every aircraft in sight, including Noriega's Learjet. The mission was accomplished, but the repercussions from that night are still felt in the SEAL community.
To a regular conventional military commander, a casualty is the result of war. He expects 5%, 10%, whatever percentage casualties in any type of military operations. For a Navy SEALs, if there's a casualty, it means somebody made a mistake. And so they spend a lot of time after an operation, particularly if there is a casualty, second-guessing each other and accusing each other, trying to figure out, this is internally, who made the mistake. And that's what they did in Pattaya Airport.
Navy SEALs are part of Special Operations Command. Over 4,000 soldiers from this command participated in Just Cause, including members of Delta Force. The activities of this unit are so classified that their existence will not be officially confirmed by the U.S. military. Their rescue of an American citizen on that first night was one of the best-kept secrets of the war. Kurt Muse was an American who'd lived in Panama since he was 5 years old. He married his high school sweetheart, queen of the prom at a Panamanian high school. After completing a short tour of duty in the Army, he settled down in Panama, working in the family business, selling graphics equipment. It was a comfortable life. The violence of General Noriega's regime began to affect Muse. In 1988, one of his close friends was arrested and murdered. Then, after his business printed flyers for demonstrators, PDF troops set fire to his shop.
I had a couple of choices, fight or flight. You either shut your mouth and just don't do anything, or get out of the country. Well, I decided to stay, and I decided to somehow fight this institution, this man.
Muse and several Panamanian friends banded together to form what eventually became known as the Voice of Liberty. The identities of the members are obscured for their protection. Simple radio components were their weapons. Starting out with scanners, Muse and his friends listened in on police communications. They issued fake orders to confuse the PDF. They would also appeal to the conscience of soldiers, asking them to stop beating on fellow citizens. By mid-1988, they decided to go one step further and make radio broadcasts. They smuggled in electronic parts from Miami to override the government radio frequencies. For their initial broadcast, Muse and his group chose the occasion of a Noriega speech to the nation. Muse recorded the broadcast to audio tape and set up their transmitter.
And the announcer says, "And now we present to you General Manuel Antonio Noriega." And everybody starts cheering. And then at that very same moment, poof, we hit the transmit button.
Atención, atención pueblo panameño, atención.
As a stunned audience listened, Noriega was interrupted by a 2-minute broadcast encouraging the people of Panama to vote against him in the upcoming elections.
It was the most scary 2 minutes of my life.
General Noriega was completely blindsided. Muse knew that he and the Voice of Liberty were now enemies of the state and that they would be hunted down.
Transmitting the Voice of Liberty.
Muse and his group set up their transmitters in various apartments in the city and began broadcasting anti-Noriega messages.
The whole opposition movement had been beaten and driven into the ground so badly that we were the only voice of opposition in the entire country.
Señor mío Jesucristo, guía nuestros pasos por el sendero que hoy hemos de recorrer. Protege a nuestro pueblo. Consuela a la madre de los desaparecidos. Da tu aliento a la esposa e hijos de los encarcelados. De 2 millones de panameños que clamamos por justicia.
Although some claim that the group received strong CIA support, Muse says that they were only given a transmitter from the agency and that they built most of their equipment themselves. The PDF began using radio direction finding equipment to track these transmitters and catch those responsible. The Voice of Liberty played a dangerous cat-and-mouse game as they moved the transmitters around, trying to stay ahead of the PDF. In early 1989, PDF troops stormed this building and burst into apartment 10C. Muse and his friends could hear the Panamanian officers talking over the radio.
We heard the whole conversation between the major and the colonel. He went to the apartment and said, "The transmitter's not there." And the colonel was furious. He said, "The transmitter is there, I know it." All of our direction finders said, "It is there, that is the apartment." Search under the bed, search in the stove, search everywhere. There's no transmitter. By some fluke of nature, their direction finding thing got upset by about 10 yards. We were in fact in apartment 10C, but in the other twin tower.
On the 5th of April, 1989, the game was over. Someone had tipped off the PDF about Muse while he was in Miami on another trip. He was going through customs at the airport when he saw himself on a wanted poster.
It says, "Kurt Muse, American citizen, arrest him."
Within minutes, he was surrounded by police and taken away.
The clock stopped, the world stopped. It was like a silent scream. What do you do?
After he was arrested, a man was beaten in front of him as a warning to cooperate. At one point, he was kept awake for 3 days as he was questioned. After they found his radio equipment, his interrogator pulled out a gun and threatened to kill him. Muse was placed in the Cárcel Modelo prison, which was located near the Comandancia. His cell was barely 8 by 12 feet, his bed a foam mat. He was an eyewitness to scenes he still can't forget.
Hundreds of people were brought to my prison. They were the demonstrators. There was a young Panamanian, and he was hoisted up on the basketball hoop by his handcuffs and then beaten mercilessly And he hung there just, screaming for his life. I can tell you that there's no sound that is worse than the sound of a man being tortured. It's horrible.
As tensions increased between Panama and the U.S., Noriega called Muse a hostage. An executioner was put by his door in case U.S. troops attacked.
He was almost kind of a cause célèbre in Washington. He became, in effect, an agency asset that had to be rescued. He was then, I guess, a classic candidate for a Delta Force operation, because that's what Delta Force does. Goes into very, very difficult places and rescues hostages or takes down terrorists.
With the help of a model from the CIA, an exact replica of Modelo Prison was built in Florida.
They conducted very, very detailed rehearsals of how they were going to enter into the prison before any of the guards had a chance to get to Kurt Muse and kill him. Delta Force even sent in their commandos ahead of time of the attack, dressed as civilians wearing Hawaiian shirts, and who wandered around the area where the prison was to scope it out.
The bold rescue of Kurt Muse began just as the AC-130 Spectre gunship began firing on the commandancia next door.
And as I was laying down on the ground, bits and pieces of concrete were flying in from next door, which was clear across the street, into my cell.
The helicopter carrying Muse's rescue team landed on the prison roof. Delta Force members blew open the door and made their way to Muse's cell, using a combination of stun grenades and pinpoint firing.
I heard gunfire inside my prison, and then I heard more explosions, and I heard more machine gun fire, more explosions, and the hall filled with smoke. It smelled like war. And I could see these little beams of white light sort of crisscrossing. I saw this figure that filled my cell door. And this fellow said, "Moose, are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm okay." He said, "Get down, I'm blowing the door." So I just went down the ground, he blew the door, and he came running over to me and told me that he was there to take me home.
As the Delta Force helicopter took off from the roof, it took heavy fire. It nearly crashed into the street. The pilot managed to keep it airborne as it wound its way between the buildings and made a left turn. When the pilot tried to climb a second time, they were shot down.
We exited this chopper, which was like a wounded animal. I mean, the blade was still going around, and it was all charred, and every time the blade would go around, the helicopter would sort of jump.
The rotor blade hit Muse's rescuer in the head. He went down, and so did Muse.
My face was maybe 3, 4, 5 inches from his. He opens his eyes and he says, "Moose, are you okay?" And this commando had been like resuscitated for the dead.
Armored personnel carriers involved in the attack in the commandancia rolled in and saved the Delta Force team and Muse. His ordeal was finally over. Muse was flown to Washington to see his wife and children. They escaped from Panama after he was arrested. It had been 9 months since they last saw him.
It was snowing, and the windows were all sort of snowy looking, and they were sort of all peering at the thing at me. And I came out of the snow and into their arms, and we hugged for about 30 minutes with really no verbal communication, just hugging. And I went home.
It was 5 days before Christmas.
My wife had hung my stocking by the fireplace, so it was there. And it was the best Christmas of my life.
Just as Delta Force freed Kurt Muse in the opening moments of Just Cause, they were involved in another operation. This was not a rescue. It was a manhunt for Muse's jailer. Before Delta Force landed on the roof of Modelo Prison to rescue Kurt Muse, Special Operation helicopters battled Panamanian soldiers in the surrounding buildings of the Comandancia. Victor Casanova was one of them.
We began to shoot at them. Well, it looked like a scene from Star Wars. Lights everywhere, green lights, red lights, that emanated from the helicopters that were coming from different points. And from our side, all you could see were the tracers from here.
During the invasion, the PDF and Dignity battalions were completely overwhelmed, outnumbered, and outgunned.
If it could be said that we lost, we lost. There is no... We knew that we were going to lose from the beginning because it was the first highest superpower. There was no doubt about that on our side.
The biggest worry of the Americans, that the PDF would escape into the jungle and wage a protracted guerrilla war, would never happen. Southcom expected the war to be one-sided. However, they didn't expect General Noriega to escape.
Second important mission for Delta Force, besides rescuing Kurt Muse, was to try to capture Manuel Noriega. They kept elaborate logbooks on him, elaborate surveillance charts on him to try and predict where he would be when we attacked.
On the day of the invasion, Southcom lost track of Noriega. By constantly switching vehicles and staying on the move, he escaped those who were tracking him. Ironically, he placed himself in the path of more American troops by staying at Torrijos Tocumen Airport on the night of December 19th. It was a major target for Army Rangers. As they landed, Noriega's bodyguards rushed him out of the area. The Rangers barely missed him.
And it was a bitter disappointment for the Pentagon and the Special Operations Command when in the first few hours they could not find Noriega.
Both Delta Force and Navy SEAL members scoured the country looking for him. Noriega and his bodyguards hid in several homes, traveling as little as possible. Noriega was eventually cornered in the Vatican Embassy. The world watched and waited.
After about a week, the Panamanian people started gathering around the Nunciatura in a big cordon of chanting, and they wanted to lynch Noriega.
Major General Cisneros called a meeting with Monsignor Laboa, the papal ambassador. He told Laboa that he could guarantee his safety, but not Noriega's.
And I want you to know that if they break and can try to come in here and lynch Noriega, I'm not going to harm a Panamanian in order to protect Noriega. As soon as I told the nuncio that, you could see his eyes light up. He went across to the street, went directly to Noriega, and he told Noriega, the same thing that happened to Benito Mussolini is going to happen to you. That crowd is going to come in here and lynch you. And that scared him. He immediately agreed to come on out.
General Noriega was brought by helicopter to a waiting airplane. Operation Just Cause was over. The U.S. invasion was the single bloodiest event in the history of Panama. 23 American soldiers lost their lives. Hundreds of Panamanians were killed. Fires in the neighborhood surrounding the Comandancia left over 15,000 without homes.
I think that after 9 years, many of the people who went out to applaud the invasion now think it over. And they realize that there was nothing to applaud. Because what the invasion brought about was death and destruction.
Despite fighting a controversial war, Panama and the U.S. will always be bound together by treaties and a long history.
Panama had been a natural ally and a friend of the United States. We had our ups and downs, during the time of 1903 until 1999. But again, when you have a friend, you're willing to forgive and forget.
The lasting legacy of this war is found in the controversial name of the invasion, Operation Just Cause.
I think it was just. I think it was the right thing to do. Noriega had lost control. He was creating a terrorist regime. The situation was dangerous. We acted in self-defense.
Was it just cause? Was it sufficient reason to kill the number of people it killed, U.S. and Panamanian? You be the judge.